This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of the Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, it is Ryan Hickey alongside Brian Tripp. Tripp, very excited here for week number 4. We got some really good games we're going to break down. Interesting conference layouts depending on how this weekend does go. We talk about some teams as teams to beat. We'll discuss, of course, give you week 4 game picks as well. But for those that like the old school, for those that clamor for the old Big Ten rough and tumble win in the trenches, this week feels like the old school Big Ten week, where you look around some of these games, you look at the keys we're going to get into here. This feels like the old school Big Ten, for at least 1 week, Tripp, is back.
I'm not going to go that far, but I'm just excited that you kick it off Friday night with a ranked versus ranked matchup between two teams that haven't played many games over the last 10, 15, 20 years as ranked opponents, Illinois and Nebraska, on a Friday night, which is becoming maybe a sneaky good Big Ten television window on Friday night. And then USC at Michigan for the first time as a Big Ten team. USC goes to take on the defending national champs in a game where they really could make a statement on the road in Ann Arbor. And then some of those other teams you talk about, the running game, the ground and pound, Rutgers at Virginia Tech, Iowa at Minnesota, Michigan State at Boston College. So you've got a mix of really intriguing non-conference matchups, but also some really good conference matchups as we're nearing really what will become a great time of year where you look at the schedule and just be all Big Ten games. We're close. Not there quite yet.
No, you're right. But inching closer, and one of those starts on Friday night. I'm with you, by the way. I love this idea by the Big Ten and Fox now.
Mm-hmm.
You have, last week we saw the Big 12 in primetime. Now we got the Big 10 in primetime. And it's a ranked matchup, a very exciting matchup that we're both looking forward to. Number 24 Illinois at number 22 Nebraska. Should be a really great atmosphere at Memorial Stadium. First Friday night game there ever. So I'm sure the fans will be jacked up, ready to go. Both teams trying to end very long losing streaks when playing ranked, unranked matchups here. Let me start you off with this, Tripp. This game is decided by what?
I think how Nebraska faces adversity for the first time this year. Illinois obviously had that in their win against Kansas coming from behind. Nebraska has been unchallenged. 54, not only are they starting a true freshman at quarterback, Dylan Raiola, who has been incredible so far this season, 54% of Nebraska's players on their roster are freshmen. They have outscored opponents, and this was a great stat that you found, 79-10 in the first half of games. They have not turned the ball over. They have not faced a defense like a Brett Bielema-led Illinois team and their defense that they have this year. I think how they handle adversity for the first time will really be a true tell sign of how good Nebraska is. The benefit for them, right, is they're at home. 400th straight sellout at Memorial Stadium. They're at home. But I think could be the first game where they get punched in the mouth, and we'll have to see how a young team handles that. A team that was so mistake-prone just one calendar year ago.
That's a good point, because you're right. You talk about the youth on this team. You talk about, like you said, the hot start. They're outscoring their first 3 opponents so far 79-10 in the first half. But on the flip side, you look at the second half. I know, look, the scores have not really forced them to put the foot on the gas pedal. So maybe it is a little bit of taking the foot off the gas a little bit and easing up. But the second half scoring margin for Nebraska so far through 3 games, just 23-10. So if you're Illinois, you have to expect, right, on the road, raucous atmosphere, that Nebraska is going to come out and try to throw some punches early, try to knock you out early. If you can withstand those, get to halftime, I don't know, within 7 points, 3 points, hell, maybe you have a lead, you have to feel really good if you're Brett Bielema and this team coming back in the second half like they did against Kansas in a back-and-forth game, and a team where Nebraska, like you said, hasn't really been challenged so far this season. You have to feel really, really good if you're an Illini fan here. If this game is close at halftime, that the Illini, you could say, have the advantage in the second half based on right now what Nebraska hasn't seen and what Illinois so far has.
This is really two teams that are in a similar spot. Illinois hasn't been 3-0 to start a season since 2011. Nebraska hasn't won a game against an AP-ranked team since 2016. Both teams are off to really good starts, and both, you feel like if they can get through this week, have the ability to put up an 8, 9, 10 win season, especially, and everyone's talked about Nebraska's schedule, especially for Nebraska. But it feels like these are two teams that were turnover prone last year. If you can correct that, get enough out of your running game. And I think Nebraska's running game is a little bit better because of the combination of Dante Dowdle and Emmett Johnson. What we've seen really hasn't just been Dylan Raiola on the offensive side of the football so far for them. But Illinois, Luke Altmaier has a 6'3" senior wide receiver, Pat Bryant. 15 catches, 4 of them for touchdowns, 234 yards. I know Naylor's been good in the passing game for Nebraska this year. But I think that combination is one of the, so far, better combinations in the Big Ten. But will Illinois get enough out of its running game against a Nebraska run defense that has held opponents, right, weak opponents, to 70 yards rushing per game so far this season? And teams haven't been able to run because they've been playing catch-up against the Huskers. So I know that after 3 games, small sample size, like a lot goes into, you can't really judge a team by its numbers yet for me, but I think Nebraska's got more balance on offense, and ultimately it's which team doesn't turn the ball over, or which team's defense can create turnovers, which no one in the country maybe has done better than Illinois so far through 3 games this season.
We saw those interceptions loom large for Illinois against Kansas, a pick 6, especially there. That really helped kind of turn the tide of the game there a few weeks ago. I'm glad you brought up the run game and defense, because that's where, for me, I feel like this game is going to be decided. You look at the quarterbacks, like you said, they're going to get a lot of attention because of the position and also how well both have played so far.
Yep.
But I think this game is going to be decided by the offensive lines and the defensive lines. And I think right now that favors Nebraska. They have a really, really strong defensive line. They got after Shedeur Sanders a lot in the only game they've been challenged defensively, we'll say, against Colorado 2 weeks ago. And they've done a great job so far. You're right, limited sample size against weaker opponents of stuffing the run. So I'm with you in terms of both offenses here. If they want to have success, have to be balanced. If you become one-dimensional, I think, against either defense, you're in trouble here. And I think Nebraska will do a better job of forcing Illinois to be one-dimensional. They have one of the best rush defenses in the country. That I think if you have Luke Altmaier now dropping back 35 times, 40 times, I think that plays right into the hands of that Cornhusker defense. And on the other side, I like Nebraska's offensive line. You know, they've kept Raiola upright. Part of the reason why he's done a good job at holding on to the football and not turning it over as a true freshman. He's been sacked just 1 time so far. So if you're able to get a push, and we've seen that offensive line for Illinois or defensive line, for Illinois, be a little leaky in the run game. If you can get a push up front, which I think the Cornhuskers can offensively here, get the ground game going. Don't have to explode, but just keep them honest. 4 yards a pop here. I think that sets up the run game or the pass game better for the Cornhuskers, helps keep them balanced on offense. I think Nebraska's defense will do a better job in this game of forcing Illinois to be one-dimensional versus the other side.
Completely agree with you. I think that's the path for, that's the recipe for Nebraska to win. That being said, Illinois, if they can play with a lead and force Nebraska to have to throw the football, make them uncomfortable for the first time. Xavier and Miles Scott, defensive backs, I think they match up really well against the Nebraska wide receivers. Get Raiola to throw interceptions, put some pressure on them, make them uncomfortable. That's the formula for Illinois to be successful. I think there's a greater chance that the formula you laid out for Nebraska to win the game, I think that's what plays out on Friday night. But I think the way for Illinois to win, it's not unthinkable to go in there and win this game if they can be a physical football team, if Luke Altmaier can avoid making mistakes, if they cash in the red zone, right? This is probably a 24-20, 2017 type of game. So it could come down to 1 or 2 trips into the red zone. Are you settling for a field goal, or are you connecting and getting into the end zone for a touchdown? Or, which team makes that crucial turnover? 1 or 2 turnovers could decide this game. Whoever plays a clean game is better on third downs. It's really cliche. Clean game, better on third downs, better in the red zone, ultimately could be the difference in a 3-6 point game like this.
I have a question for you, because you've been on the sideline, so I want to know your expertise. In this game, I'm with you. Let's say it should be a closer game and lower scoring. What if Raiola does have the worst game so far of his true freshman season? Is playing at home, like if you get the crowd that's jacked up and going to be very excited for this game, and you have an offense that's scuffling, does that almost add in a way, because you're home, does it add more pressure, you think, on a true freshman quarterback to kind of get out of this rut versus if you were on the road, you already know it's a hostile environment? Like, could that home field advantage in this game, if it is ugly, it is kind of slow, and there's maybe some turnovers early, Could that actually work against Raiola here in this game, you think?
I think the fans in a ranked matchup like this on a Friday night, they'll settle for whatever it takes to win. And there is that leeway because he is just a freshman. Expectations are incredibly high, but he is just a freshman quarterback. I don't think it's as the game plays out, how do you handle the reaction of the crowd depending on the trajectory of the game? I think it's more, how do you control your emotions before the game? And just in a game like this, I see it all the time, where players try to do too much instead of just doing their job on the field, where the emotions, they want to win so badly. They know the stakes of the game. It's how do you manage the emotions and just play the way that your coaches and your system want you to. And that's when teams are at their best, where they try not to do too much and they don't let the emotions overwhelm them in the beginning of the game, especially for a home team in a rowdy environment.
You see it in college football more than anything else, right? Like you said, emotions trying to do too much. And that's why I wonder, like, we've seen, I'm not saying turn on the team, but like you see home fans get anxious a little bit, get a little frustrated, maybe get some scattered boos. And we've seen in past games, whatever, like that can almost kind of put more pressure on an offense to try to do something, which can lead to a negative effect versus, a positive effect.
Having been to Lincoln, though, I don't think that's a fan base either that will go in that direction. They're intelligent, passionate, smart, positive fans. I don't see them going that direction, and nor do I expect that to be the impact of the game. It would be controlling the emotions in the beginning of the game and not trying to do too much.
So definitely something to look out there for, especially if you're an Illinois fan. This beginning of the game, this first half is going to be key for you. Keep it close here to make this one a good one Friday night in Lincoln. A really good one on in the Big House on Saturday trip. Number 11 USC at number 18 Michigan. A few things here. The first thing I want to throw by you is this game specifically for me, I have done the biggest 180 on in terms of how I thought this game was going to go in the preseason versus how I think this game is going to go now. And the biggest thing is, honestly, USC's toughness. I was really impressed. We talked about a lot here on the Week 1 Reaction podcast of just how well USC's defense played against LSU's offense, how tough they were against the run, and they actually showed a backbone for the first time, at least Lincoln Riley's tenure there at Southern Cal. That toughness for me, in part, is why I've done the biggest turnaround here on USC going to this game.
Well, I know you mentioned it going into Michigan, Texas. Michigan's secondary outside of Will Johnson. And it's still a defense that has 3 projected first-round NFL draft picks on it. But I think USC, with their weapons, Zachariah Branch, Kyron Hudson, Jacoby Lane, Lake McCree, their tight end, who's their leading receiver so far this season, the balance of what they have with the run game, even though they still throw 62% of the time, USC threw the ball against LSU in their marquee matchup. Miller Moss, who's been so incredibly effective and leads all Power 4 quarterbacks in deep ball passer rating, granted, small sample size. I think it's their ability to stretch the field horizontally and vertically. I don't think Michigan's secondary will be able to match up against USC like that. The same way that they struggled against Texas. For Michigan, again, control the clock. You got Mullings and Edwards going in your last game. Alex Orji is going to be the quarterback. Do you have the ability to be multi-dimensional enough offensively to make USC's defense uncomfortable? I don't think so. I think what USC can do offensively, Michigan's not holding them to less than 20 points. And right now, you just don't see Michigan's offense scoring more than 20 points the way that they're going.
Couldn't agree more. I think you're right. You nailed it on the head with Texas. Texas put the game plan out there for USC and how to exploit Michigan's defense. I'm glad you brought up McCree, not only the leading receiver for USC, but we saw Gunnar Helm with Texas a few weeks ago have a field day against that defense. So tight end has been a weak point for that Michigan defense. Not great that another great tight end is coming into your house here and makes it another matchup nightmare. The big news going into this game, right, like you mentioned, Alex Orji now is now quarterback 1. He's replaced Davis Warren. Again, we've seen Michigan really be cautious in how they handle him when it comes to throwing the ball. He's much more athletic and dynamic than Warren is. So expect some creativity in the run game. But I can't right now expect Orji to be a big difference maker for Michigan offensively when there's not really a threat of the pass. I'll see USC put 8-9 guys in the box every time and say, we dare you to throw. That seems like a losing formula right now for Michigan. I don't know how much of a difference Orji is going to make, Trip, coming to this game when he's really, for the most part, one-dimensional.
But last year, even if USC put 8 or 9 guys in the box, they still weren't stopping the run. That was the problem for them. As you talked about, they're more physical. I think it's a good test for D'Anton Lynn's team to match the physicality. Michigan still has a good running game. It's still a top 25 team. They're on the road in the Big House. I think this is a good test for their defense. The big thing for Alex Orji is just not turning the football over. Michigan has no chance if USC is getting short fields or scores any points on the defensive side. So for Alex Orji, it's playing a clean game, sustaining drives, limiting possessions in the game. The same thing we talked about when Michigan played Texas. It just didn't happen at all. But if he can play a cleaner game than Davis Warren, that's already better than what Michigan got the first couple of weeks of the season.
To highlight D'Anton Lynn's impact immediately, USC last year, and you're right, they could put 13 guys in the box last year. It didn't matter. They were stopping no one. They were 117th in the country last year in terms of rushing yards allowed per game. This year, so far through 3 games, again, a good test against LSU in the opener, they're 34th. They have done a dramatic turnaround night and day. We saw Lynn do that last year at UCLA. Better personnel. You had, Latu there, first-round pick on that UCLA defense, so a little bit more talent. But the turnaround that we saw from UCLA go from 2022 to 2023 is the same thing happening now with USC from 2023 now to 2024. This guy, I don't know what it is, Trip, but this guy is he's a magic man.
Oh, man. I think there is some strength on that. I think USC's defensive side of the football, I think the strength is the defensive line, though. There's some guys there and some depth. So if there's one area, that's the area that I think he walks into and inherits, plus the transfer portal. I think that's the area that's the strongest of that USC defense, too. So that really helps them. One other one I'm looking forward to in the Big Ten, Iowa at Minnesota. There's a couple of big non-conference games, but Iowa at Minnesota. This is a game Minnesota won 12-10 last season. Over-under is 35. The biggest key in this game is scoring points, but how many points it will be necessary to win?
Speaking of which, this is really interesting because the over-under says otherwise. 35 is very low in modern college football. But you know what's been interesting about Iowa's defense this year, Trip, is that it's been uncharacteristically leaky in the back end. You look so far through 3 games, they have already allowed 3 passes of 50 or more yards. Why that's important is you go back the last 7 years of Iowa football. They have only allowed in those 7 years a combined 24 passes of 50 or more yards. One of the elite things Iowa does outside of taking the ball away on defense is not allowing a big play. They keep everything in front of you. They make you go the length of the field, 10 yards here, 7 yards there. They don't allow explosive plays. Well, through 3 games, they've essentially allowed their season average in 50-plus yard plays in just 3 games with the best offense being Iowa State. That is concerning here. And you look at Max Brosmer ever since the opener against North Carolina has really started to settle in now. Granted, the competition against Nevada and Rhode Island, it is what it is. But he is looking more comfortable in the passing game. There's been a better balance now that Darius Taylor's returning the backfield for the Golden Gophers here. If I'm PJ Fleck, I'm taking shots early. I'm testing this Iowa defense, the secondary specifically here, and see if I can break one early on, get that crowd into it. It's a concern right now for Kirk Ferentz's defense that they are uncharacteristically leaky for the first time in what feels like decades.
And then the next part that plays into that is field position, right? Iowa wants to pin teams deep and make them go the full length of the field because of, and it's like the running joke, right? Because of their punting game, their kicking game. But seriously, like special teams have to be there for the Hawkeyes too. It's making a team drive the full length of the field. Is Minnesota explosive enough? Are they explosive enough on the offensive side to create 1, 2, or 3 big plays that takes that balance that Iowa wants to have of forcing a team to drive the entire field? It's very difficult to sustain, especially in college, mistake-prone teams. Very difficult to sustain 12, 13, 14 play drives. I don't think from what I've seen so far from Minnesota this year, as you mentioned, some changes in the backfield, running game, big help. I don't think they're explosive enough at the wide receiver position to support Brosmer to make those big plays against even a different Iowa secondary that doesn't have Cooper DeJean this year as the anchor back there, but is still really, really talented.
And why it's important, too, if you're Minnesota, is you look at, like you said, what Iowa wants to do balance-wise. I mean, Caleb Johnson, Hawkeyes running back, number 1 in the country. Forget the Big Ten. Number 1 in the country almost 500 rushing yards so far through 3 games. That's what Iowa wants to do. And if all of a sudden you're able, early in the game here, if you're Minnesota, break a few plays, get some points on the board, maybe get a 7-10 point lead early, and all of a sudden now you make Cade McNamara try to beat you with that right arm. We've seen in the past, that's not a winning formula here for Iowa. So it does go hand in hand if you are right now Minnesota. Those explosive plays, if you can get them, because Iowa's giving them to you, and you can hit 1 or 2, all of a sudden now in the back end, that forces the Hawkeyes to become more one-dimensional in the pass game, which is what they don't want to do. Yep. That's the formula right there for you to get to Floyd or Rosedale.
Just so fans know, for Minnesota so far this season, yards per pass attempt, not completion, only 8.1 yards. Yards per rushing attempt, 3.8 yards this season. It is not an explosive offense.
With 2 of those being, again, against Rhode Island and Nevada. Maybe PJ Fleck was keeping something for this game here. Maybe that's what he was doing. Oh boy. Speaking of the run game, explosive plays here, good non-conference game. Very excited about this one. Mm-hmm. Rutgers at Virginia Tech. Battle of the run games here, Tripp. Which run game was it? The Hokies? Is it the Scarlet Knights? Do you feel better about going to this game?
Neutral site, 100%. Rutgers is the better team. Rutgers 0-6, though, all-time at Lane Stadium, dating back to their days as ACC rivals, and they've lost those 6 games by an average of 23 points. Rutgers won this 35-16 at home last year in Piscataway. Kyle Monangai had 143 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's the best player on the field in this game. Rutgers running back. They're better at quarterback with Kaliakmanis this year. I think that's an upgrade for Rutgers. I don't even think Wimsatt threw for less than 100 yards last year in that game. I know he did a little with his legs, but Kaliakmanis still can hurt you with his legs a little bit too. I think Rutgers is more balanced. I think they're a better team, and Virginia Tech has struggled so far this season containing the run. Neutral site, hands down, Rutgers win. Lane Stadium, you never know. And right now, they're on a high on the Virginia Tech campus. Just got announced that Metallica is going to play their tour at Lane Stadium coming up. Next leg of their tour.
Wow. Okay, that is pretty cool. That is very cool. But does that help Virginia Tech's run defense? Like you said, they're allowing 190 yards per game, and they were gashed not by Oregon, not by Army. They were gashed last week by Old Dominion to the tune of 6.2 yards per carry on 39 attempts. If Old Dominion and Ricky Ronnie is shredding you in the run game, well, I think one of the best running backs in all of college football, Kyle Monangai, can do the same as well here. The thing, though, if you're Rutgers here, it's going to be really tough. It's not only Virginia Tech's running back, Bashal Tutin, who's been really good here, 269 yards, over 5 yards a carry. It's also Kyron Jones, who's a tremendous dual-threat quarterback, can really beat you with his arm, also with his legs as well. That defensive line for Rutgers is going to have to be very disciplined here, because if you allow Tutin to get free, he's going to burst one. If you allow Drones here for an opening, he'll take it and burn you here. It's going to be a tough task here for Rutgers' defensive line to get both guys, corralled. But if you're Rutgers, if you're Greg Schiano here, run the ball early, run the ball often, take that crowd out of it early. That's the best way to suffocate a crowd. Just run the ball down their throat and make that Lane Stadium crowd quiet.
Sneaky big game here for both head coaches. Rutgers, Greg Schiano, they could be, I think we mentioned it 1 or 2 of the first podcasts that we did. They could be that everyone wants to talk about Nebraska now. Illinois has got some hype around them. They could be that surprise Big Ten team that's knocking on the door, dare I say it, of a college football playoff berth. And for Brent Pry and Virginia Tech, it hasn't been super smooth sailing. They need some sort of statement win after having a hiccup earlier this season. But sneaky big game for both of these programs. Just let me read this to you for Rutgers here. After this game, huge, tough environment, 3:30 on the road, Lane Stadium, right? After this game, home against Washington, at Nebraska, real challenge, October 5th.
Big time.
Home against Wisconsin, home against UCLA, on the road at USC, home against Minnesota, at Maryland, home against Illinois, at Michigan State. If they could somehow go on the road and take this game and win one of Nebraska and USC, they should be the favored team in the rest of those games, depending on what happens with Michigan State. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Oregon. They don't play Penn State. And they don't play Michigan. This is a sneaky big game for Rutgers, which has a schedule that is manageable.
You're right. You were very right about that. Now, it's a tough test to go into Lincoln, tough test to go at USC with how both teams are playing. But
that's not going into Columbus. That's not going to Eugene. That's not going to Columbus.
No, it is not. It is very manageable here. And you're not wrong. Look, even a 9-win season for Rutgers is going to be
a great year.
Tremendous.
Yep.
But I'm with you. This game right here is a catalyst. If you want to even have those dreams, forget about double digits.
And that's 9 wins, really, yep. I agree.
I'm with you, but it starts here. I'm with you. I like that.
Speaking of Michigan State 3-0 at Boston College 2-1.
1-0 in the conference.
Yeah, they got that win. They come back win in the fourth quarter against Maryland a couple of weeks ago. If Michigan State can get this game in space, where it's not one, Boston College has a better offensive line, but I think the playmaking ability of Aiden Childs and Nick Marsh, their freshman wide receiver, there's something there for Michigan State if they can play a clean game and not get completely dominated in the trenches by BC's offensive line. Again, tough challenge, right? Same as Michigan State. In this game, Michigan State's probably not the better team. Rutgers is better than Virginia Tech, but on the road, ACC team, night game. Boston College had a great home atmosphere last time they played at home. Just gave Missouri all they could handle. Already have beaten Florida State. Obviously, BC's favored, but Michigan State, this could be a statement type, hey, don't overlook us this year type of game for them.
I'm with you, and I feel like the path to victory for the Spartans is very similar to what we talked about with Minnesota in their game against Iowa, because with what we've seen so far from Boston College, their offense is tough to stop, but it's also a plotting offense. You know, they're not very explosive. They're not going to rip off a 60-yard gain here for a touchdown. For the most part, they're going to drive down the field. And the Florida State game, like you mentioned, they held the ball for 40 minutes, 10, 12, 15 play drives, 4 yards a run, 6 yards a pass. We've seen Michigan State be explosive in the pass game here. If Aiden Childs is on it and he's not turning the ball over, this Michigan State team can score and score quickly here. If you're able to get up on Boston College, take them out of their game like Missouri was able to last week and force them to play from behind, you're now in the driver's seat. You know, you are now in a spot where you are making Boston College play to your level instead of the other way around. Michigan State, if you're able to hit on a few home runs early here and not obviously turn the ball over, which Aiden Childs has been prone to do a little bit, you're sitting in a really good spot to pull off an upset. And like you said, send a statement to the rest of the conference of record-wise at the end, it may not be pretty, but this is sure as hell going to be a tough team, and this is not an easy W on your schedule the rest of the year.
Less penalties. They're this third most penalized team in college football. It needs something out of Karan Lynch-Adams and Nathan Carter in the running game. But the explosive passing ability, explosive plays can make up a big margin for a team that I think is heading in the right direction with Jonathan Smith, and has been a little bit of a pleasant surprise so far to see them sitting at 3-0 this season.
It absolutely has. Before we get to picks here, Trip, I want to kind of ask a few questions, and let's kind of project ahead a little bit to see what happens here. So Nebraska-Illinois, we talked about that game, obviously ranked on ranked matchup. Whoever wins, doesn't matter. Should either team right now, when you get a ranked win, and for Illinois, at least at the time they play, to be their second win over ranked opponent, would you consider the winner of Illinois-Nebraska to be, after week 4, considered a top 4 team in the conference?
No, I think right now it's pretty clear that it's Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and USC.
I would agree. The resume would be impressive. Again, especially if you're Illinois here, a road-ranked win on top of, I know the Kansas win does not look as good anymore after last week, but still, you beat them at the time that they're ranked. The resume is impressive, and I'm with you. I still think that they have a ways to go. They have to prove it a little bit more here to be, even after week 4, considered an upper echelon here. You need a big upset from Michigan. You need a big upset from maybe Marshall or Kent State here to take down.
Pump the brakes. What I will say is the winner of that game, along with if Rutgers goes on the road to win at Virginia Tech, Nebraska, Illinois, Rutgers are probably teams 5, 6, 7 right now in that
tier 2 range.
Yeah, like Indiana. Yeah. So you got your tier 1. Tier 2, and don't forget Michigan I'd include in Tier 2 too. They lost to Texas, even if they get beat this week. They still have the talent to beat those teams on any given day. But I think that's a group. Indiana, Nebraska, Illinois, Rutgers, Michigan would be the teams after that top tier. That would be like your Tier 2 teams in the Big Ten.
Let me ask you this then. Speaking of Tier 1 teams, USC goes into the Big House, beats number 18 Michigan on top of their ranked win already against currently number 16 LSU. Are they, after week 4, should they be considered the team to beat in the conference?
No, not team to beat. To your point, they'd probably have the best early season resume if that matters. I don't know that it does matter. I still think there's going to be too many question marks on their defense until they play Penn State. Penn State coming up on October 12th at the Coliseum. That's when we're going to find out the biggest strides the USC defense has made. Right? Check a box against LSU. If they can stop Michigan's run game, it answers some questions about their physicality, but they will not face a well-rounded offense until they face Penn State on October 12th in the Coliseum. Until we learn more about that defense against one of the big three, Penn State, Ohio State, or Oregon, I am not ready to make that leap and put them as the top team in the conference. Impressive start, but a lot of questions still.
I would say yes, honestly, just because of I'm not saying they're the best team, but I think at this point, 4 weeks in, we should now start talking about teams less of what we think about them in the preseason and more of how they've played and who they've played. And I would reward teams right now for playing tougher games early. Now, it does balance out at the end. Like you said, Penn State's coming to town in a few weeks, or Ohio State's going to Oregon, going to Ohio State. This could change. But if we're talking about a team right now with 2 top 20 victories at a neutral site and on the road, I mean, that is easily by far Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, they've not played one ranked team so far.
But that doesn't make them the team. That doesn't make them the team to beat. That just says they've.
But if you make a statement early on, shouldn't you get rewarded for that? Should we keep let's just say, for argument's sake here, if you say Ohio State right now is the best team in the Big Ten,
yes,
right? That's a lot of it's based on preseason. I would say right now, and it's not like they've done nothing to back that up, but if you are beating Marshall and Akron and you have USC beating LSU and Michigan on the road, I would reward the Trojans for winning these bigger games early. I'm not saying they're going to sit there the rest of the year, but until Penn State plays a tough opponent, until Ohio State and Oregon get challenged and win these big games, I would rather reward right now a team that we've seen not only play teams, but do it, win.
Reward them with what? A gold star? Hey, you had the best first month of the season. Congratulations. I think you're the team to beat. I mean,
yes. Yeah. What else are we why are we playing the games then? Let me ask you this.
We're playing the games to determine who the best 12 teams are at the end of the season. And no matter what happens in the Big House, you cannot convince me that USC is the team to beat in the Big Ten. They might have the best resume so far, but they're not the team to beat in the Big Ten. And having the best resume at the end of September gets you absolutely nowhere.
Let's just play out for a second here. Ohio State washes Marshall, which they should. Penn State beats Kent State. Oregon's on a bye; they can't lose. If USC wins, would you still rank right now USC after this Saturday as number 4 in the Big Ten?
Depends how they look and depends how it's all eye test. It's all theoretical until the teams play.
Ohio State wins easily. Penn State wins easily. USC maybe slightly lower than Texas, but it's one of those games that they're in control of, and there's really no doubt, okay, USC is a better team.
I think it's Ohio State, the team to beat. Oregon, Penn State, and USC are in consideration, and it's 1 and 1. B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3. I don't care how you want to do it, but I think you're wandering down an unnecessary windy road with this perplexing Hickey hot take.
It's just all I'm trying to do is reward teams that
reward them with what? It doesn't mean anything.
But if you win early, why am I going to keep you behind teams that have beaten nobody?
Behind them in what? Your mind? Okay, cool. Okay, if they beat Michigan, you tell me you're going to say USC is the crown and jewel of the Big Ten when they beat Michigan, and you're going to be left with a pie on your face at the end of the year.
Oh, I'm not saying USC is winning the conference.
You just did. You just said they're the team to beat if they beat Michigan. You literally.
Moving forward. I'm saying moving forward out of week 4 here. Shouldn't they get rewarded rewarded
with what?
By saying, okay, they're now at the top going.
I don't give a I don't give a. You know what?
Screw your rankings. Screw the AP poll rankings. I'm making my own rankings now going forward. And if USC handles business on Saturday with a ranked win over Michigan on the road, with a ranked win over LSU at a neutral site, I am saying right now that they deserve more credit and respect and deserve to be right now at the top going into week 5 and week 5 only. These rankings change on a weekly basis, but don't we have to base what we see and rank the teams based on who they play and how they look? If you win 2 ranked opponents, like, why even
care? I don't care what the rankings are. It's September. I don't care.
This is
no one cares.
This is why it's the best.
Cares.
The NFL, your Eagles lost on Monday night. Does it really change the trajectory of the season? Probably not. They got 16 more games or 15 more games to go. There's no rankings. You win the division. You're in the playoffs. Whatever. This
what
is all
on
subjective.
earth are you talking?
Because college football is subjective. It's only 12 teams out of 134 that make it. The rankings are subjective. It's fun. It definitely is fun and creates some good arguments. Other times it's maddening. So if it's subjective and you get rewarded based on who you play, or you should get rewarded on who you play, why would we just say, okay, USC, you're still the 4th best team in the Big Ten?
Because they are.
2 impressive wins and no one else above them.
You can only
one.
Ohio State hasn't played anybody yet. They can't
exactly. So why should they get rewarded? Why are we rewarding Oregon for slipping by Idaho and Boise State?
You know when the rankings matter? December.
Yes, I will agree with that. Yes. Do I get worked up about them in September earlier than I should? Absolutely.
Yes,
I will admit,
clearly.
I'm a prisoner of the moment, but it shouldn't. Why play these games? You know what? If you're USC, screw it. Take the link.
Why do we play them? So when they get to, if they are still unbeaten, when we get to November, they'll be in the top 5. That's why. We've gotten so many compliments about the Still Enrolled podcast. All the goodwill we just built up with our audience the first 5-6 weeks. Gone. This is like the first time they've seen Hickey Unhinged.
All right, fine. You got me. I'm unhinged. I will admit it. I'll take the L on this one here. Yeah, they're fine. Let's get to picks. Let's just move. I got to move on. We got to move off that. Let's get into week 4 picks. We got some good ones here, Trip. We gave you some previews, a lot of these games. Now let's get the official predictions on the slate. Number 24, Illinois at number 22, Nebraska. Cornhuskers, 8-point favorites. Trip, who you got?
I like Illinois to cover, but Nebraska, because they're at home, I think Dylan Raiola will play a clean enough game. I like Nebraska to win. I think they're a little bit deeper team than Illinois, but being at home, huge advantage for the Huskers.
I agree with everything you said. You said a score before when we were previewing the game that I love and I gravitate towards, 24-20. I think that's kind of where this game is, lower scoring, not as explosive. 24-20, Nebraska wins. I'm with you, though. Illinois does cover the 8-point spread. Rutgers, 3.5-point underdogs on the road at Virginia Tech.
Yeah,
who you got?
Rutgers. They'll cover and win the game on the road. They're a better team.
Whoa! I have to talk about the Lane Stadium crowd, a hype. You actually did a whole not so fast there to give some props to Lee Corso. I'm with you. I think Rutgers wins outright. I like their run game. I think they'll suffocate the crowd. I think Kyle Monungai here will be ridden to a victory for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. 3-0. Lock it up. Number 11, USC. 5.5-point favorites on the road at number 18, Michigan. Again, like we talked about before, a quarterback change for the Wolverines. Does it do enough, Trip, to have Michigan win this game?
USC makes too many big plays in the passing game. No, Michigan can't keep up with USC offense. Even if USC's defense allows Michigan to get on track in the run game, still think they'll make enough big plays. I like USC on the road.
27-13. USC on the road. I'm with you. I just don't know how Michigan scores. It's basically the same conversation we had against Texas a few weeks ago. USC is not as good as Texas is, but the game plan is going to be very similar. They have the playmakers to exploit Michigan's defense, just like the Longhorns did. 27-13, USC goes into the Big House and wins, and we're sitting up top the Big Ten standings, number 1, going into week number 5. We saw UCLA get smoked at home against Indiana. Things don't get any easier now for the Bruins. They go on the road at number 16 LSU. They are 24-point underdogs. Can we get a cover here from UCLA, Trip?
They'll be better than they were last week, but no. LSU probably wins and covers at home.
I agree. Big number here on the road. UCLA right now shows no signs of life on offense or defense. So far, we are 4-4 in agreements. LSU wins. LSU does cover. Big bounce back spot here for Washington. Really demoralizing loss to Washington State last week, losing on that goal line 4th down option play. They're back at home, take on Northwestern. Northwestern made a quarterback change last week, benched Mike Wright, now bring in Jack Lausch. Huskies 10.5-point favorites at home over Northwestern. Where are you going here, Trip?
Northwestern took Duke to double OT a couple weeks ago at home on the Lake Shore. They are, though, in consideration for what they did last year. Incredible coaching by David Braun last year. But Washington, Will Rogers at home. I like Will Rogers, and I think Washington bounces back because they're at home. Northwestern might be in consideration for bottom of the barrel worst team in the Big Ten this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, you are right about that. First road trip for them as well, going across the country. Not great. I'm with you. I think Washington's offense bounces back here. I think Will Rogers puts up points. Northwestern, no matter who's at quarterback, they've not done a very good job at scoring consistently. Give me Huskies minus 10.5 at home. I am with you. We are all in agreement so far. 5 for 5. 3 games left yet. See if we get any differences. Floyd of Rosedale is up for grabs. Iowa 2.5-point favorites on the road at Minnesota. Is Minnesota now getting another victory here after last year, or going back to Iowa?
I like Iowa.
So do I. Damn. I'm looking for some sort of disagreement here, which
Michigan
is probably
State.
good right now.
Michigan State, 6.5-point favorites, or 6.5-point dogs on the road at Boston College. Boston College favored at home.
Give me BC. I just think right now, I think they will get back to their game. I think they're too good defensively and offensively. Aiden Childs, I just can't trust right now to play turnover-free football. Give me the Eagles to win and cover at home.
Yeah, BC lost last week, fell apart in the second half, but Castellanos, good quarterback, good coach. Obviously, Boston College.
Yes. Lost by a touchdown on the road to number 6, Mizzou.
Yeah, and Missouri is probably overrated a little bit if rankings matter at this point of the year. But I do like Boston College. And Purdue's at Oregon. Yeah, we're gonna be on the same page, right? Oregon State's beating Purdue. Purdue better performance than last. They're a better team than they were last. I think they're somewhere between what we saw week 1 against the Sycamores and week 3 against the Irish. They're somewhere in between that. I think Purdue. I think it's a great game. I think it's a close game, but Oregon State wins at home.
I would agree. I think cross-country travel is tough for Purdue, and I think you're still kind of licking your wounds after that shellacking you took last week. Yeah, I'll deflate my Purdue hype balloon for a little bit here and say Oregon State wins and covers at home.
I'm glad you mentioned cross-country travel because as you start looking through the schedules this year, the Big Ten did a really good job. If you're an East Coast team or a West Coast team and you have to go all the way across the country, your bye week is the next week. So like Penn State will go to USC on the 12th, we talked about, then they have a bye week. Whenever someone goes to Washington or UCLA, their bye week is the next week, and you're only making one of those long trips during the year for the East Coast teams. So the Big Ten did a really good job with that this year.
I did not realize that. That's a great eye by you. That is the case for every team except for one, just because they're traveling east so many times.
Yeah.
UCLA.
Yeah.
That you talk about at LSU, at least you're home next week against Oregon, at Penn State. You're flying to Rutgers. That's
you can't do it for the West. I mean, those teams have to leave the West Coast, but the East Coast teams going there, they did a good job with it.
They did, and that's going to be obviously a big challenge going forward here with this countrywide conference. But that is at least a break, like you said here, getting a little
coast
bit
to
of
coast.
relief.
Big Ten is coast to coast.
That it is. So with that, now we'll wrap it up for this edition of Still Enrolled, the Big Ten Podcast. Make sure you're subscribing wherever you do get your pods. Also, check us out on YouTube, Still Enrolled, same name everywhere you watch or listen to your podcasts. Make sure you tell a friend about us. We're talking about some fun stuff here. You want bragging rights over Minnesota fan if you're an Iowa fan, tell them about us. And you can, we'll give you a shout out here as well. Enjoy the games. We'll be back on Monday to break them all down right here on the Still Enrolled Podcast.
Can't wait to see your rankings on Monday.